Oh, you can see there. The Prohibition, you ask? I'll have it right here. The Prohibition was a major event in American history where alcohol was banned, leading to many problems for our nation. Although many people were against Prohibition, seeing the downsides before they actually arose, the amendments passed and were used in political arguments deciding many different elections at all levels, and promoting organized crime and bootlegging by taking away a right many people lived their life and relied on every day to support their families. The Prohibition was a sad era in American history. It occurred after alcoholism spread too much and went too far. So due to many movements, alcohol was banned. But despite this, the drunkard persevered, and smuggling ensued. This brought about the mafia in America. It eventually went so far the amendment that allowed all this to happen had to be repealed. In this section, we'll be focusing on the background and buildup of the 18th Amendment. This is how the push for Prohibition came about and who the people who worked towards it were. Alcohol has been ingrained in American culture for a long time, but along with it, temperance has also come. An early example of someone speaking against alcohol is Reverend Lyman Beecher. In the early 1800s, he saw his fellow Christians' lives being destroyed by alcohol and decided to preach against it. Slowly throughout the course of history after this, multiple groups would form also supporting this ideology. One of these groups is called the Society of Reformed Drunkards, which was formed on April 2nd, 1940. In groups like this, men would sign something called the Washingtonian Pledge, which revolved around converting to total abstinence. Boys and girls were made to sign pledges to never touch or drink alcohol. In 1851, a bill eventually got passed by Neil Dow to ban alcohol in Maine, but it eventually got overshadowed by the Civil War. By 1862, the government needed to use the liquor trade to pay for this war. Alcohol ended up still being a problem, and more protests ensued. Women were the main victims of alcoholism at this point in history, and Frances Elizabeth Caroline Willard began to lead the Women's Christian Temperance, a group founded in 1874 and one of the more renowned and recognizable groups of the temperance movement. This group had multiple departments, one of them even putting propaganda against alcohol in students' textbooks. Despite all these efforts, saloons became a staple of American culture and were used by many people, including corrupt government workers. These bars eventually became intertwined in politics. Eventually, the Anti-Saloon League began on May 24, 1893, one of, if not the most, notable groups in relation to the temperance movement. The founder of this group was Howard Hyde Russell. This group was so massive that they were able to get politicians elected in their favor. One of the people who helped with this process was Wayne Bidwell Wheeler. Over time, through a long battle against the Wets, the people who supported alcohol, who were practically led by Adolphus Busch and the leaders of the German beer companies, the 18th Amendment was eventually passed in 1919 due to the political influence of the Anti-Saloon League. This was surprising because Boyce Penrose, a member of the Senate, knew the bill was inevitable and, through threatening a filibuster, got them to agree to a 6-year time limit to pass it, which is a very short time.
Many people were all for Prohibition at the start. The mass movements around the country made their way to the top, and on December 18th of 1917, it was proposed in the Senate for the first time. It passed and made it all the way to President Woodrow Wilson. The president at the time was actually not for Prohibition, as he used his executive power to veto the new bill. However, on October 28 of 1919, the Senate voted 65-20 to override Woodrow Wilson's veto attempt. America had overturned the right to drink alcohol. Problems quickly arose. Prohibition sparked something new: organized crime. Families like the Colosimo mob came to the scene. Smuggling, moonshining, bribing. These families did anything they could to stay on top in this new society brought on by Prohibition. This is Al Capone, a 1920s mobster from Chicago. He became famous from his bootlegging and public appearance. He is still one of the most famous gangsters today. The public did not take too well to Prohibition. Many were out of jobs. Taxes had to be raised in other areas, and the people had grown weary of the new amendment. New protests would happen all across the country. These were for alcohol. Groups like the WCTU declined after the passing of the 18th Amendment, but are still around today, playing a smaller role than they once did. These new protests, along with many other factors such as the Great Depression, bringing about even more need for jobs and tax revenue, and the 18th Amendment being ineffective and only bringing more crime and corruption. Prohibition was coming to an end. The final blow was the addition of the 21st Amendment to the Constitution, undoing the 18th Amendment, making alcohol legal once again.
Prohibition brought many negatives with it. Among these include gang violence, moonshine, and health problems that came along with it, and other things, but ultimately caused the development of organized crime, which has had a lasting effect on the nation. While many would agree that alcoholism in America at the time this bill was passed was a problem that needed to be solved, they may also agree that Prohibition was not the best solution to it. Prohibition brought about the mafia and famous mobsters like Alfonso Gabriel Capone, who caused awful problems and were violent. The Prohibition brought up the same long-term effects. The mafia is still a problem in America today, and organized crime was practically brought about by Prohibition. Some of the recognizable mobsters of the Prohibition era would be Alfonso Gabriel Capone and the Five Families of Chicago. The conclusion we can draw from all of this evidence is that the Prohibition was definitely not the best way of solving a problem. By enforcing their ideologies and beliefs on American law, the groups who supported the temperance movement would end up creating bigger problems that would affect our nation decades later. Rather than violence and families being torn apart, there was all of that, plus the uprising of organized crime in America, and problems for the government who had to try and stop all of the smuggling and law-breaking which violated the amendment that certain groups had worked so hard to ratify. Ultimately, alcohol was reintroduced as a legal beverage and is something that many people drink today, but still effects of the Prohibition are lingering. The American Mafia is still present and alcoholism still exists. Like we must from all history, we need to learn from this event. Which brings up the question, what can we do to solve the problem of alcoholism in America while refraining ourselves from crime?